January 1942. The port that should not exist. The wind never stopped in Murmansk. It clawed across the ice like an animal, gnawing through coats, through breath, through silence itself. Ships groaned against the frozen quay. Their hulls were black with soot and salt, their decks glazed in a skin of Arctic glass. Men moved slowly, not from fear, but from the weight of cold. The temperature had fallen below -40. Steel burned bare hands faster than fire, yet cranes still swung above the harbor, lifting crates stamped Liverpool to Archangel, Convoy PQ-7. Each sound carried meaning: the thud of rope, the cough of a diesel, the ring of hammer on frozen bolt. No voice rose above the storm. Orders traveled by gesture. I remember a dockworker's face, half covered in frost. He breathed steam through a torn scarf. On his sleeve, a red patch darkened. Blood, maybe oil, the two were hard to tell apart here. We worked beside him, men from everywhere: British, Canadian, Icelandic, Soviet. Each ship that docked felt like a heartbeat the war might still have. The Germans called Murmansk the port that should not exist. Bombers came daily from occupied Norway. Records say 3,000 raids before winter's end, but the city refused to die. Each morning, sirens wailed across the snow. We didn't run. There was nowhere to run. We simply stood, beside cranes, beside ships, waiting to see if this one had our name on it. When bombs fell, the snow turned to dust. The sea flashed white, then black again. Afterward, we brushed the ash from the ropes and kept unloading. Some nights, the horizon glowed red from burning oil tanks. The smell mixed with fish and frost, a scent that no book has ever described correctly. It was war's breath, frozen in place. We slept in barracks made from ship crates. Stoves rattled like small engines. At dawn, the frost drew patterns on the window glass, veins, branches, maps to nowhere. Out at sea, the convoys came in silence. They traveled through storms that could crush steel, escorted by destroyers wrapped in ice. Some never arrived. Convoy PQ-13 lost 11 ships before the sun returned. We marked the dead not by ceremony, but by sound. A ship's horn, one long note through the fog. Then silence, the kind that erases everything but the living. Records suggest that by 1942, Murmansk handled nearly half of all Allied aid reaching the Soviet Union. Lend-Lease cargo, tanks, aircraft, canned meat, even locomotives, passed through hands so numb they could no longer feel shape. We didn't think of strategy then. We thought of warmth and of keeping the cranes alive. Each machine was a heartbeat, each light on the pier a promise against the dark. A British officer once said, "No harbor should function in this cold." He was right, and yet, somehow, it did. When wind died for a moment, we could hear the faint hum beneath the snow. Engines still turning, chains clinking, hearts beating. That was when I understood. This port didn't survive because of walls or ships. It survived because men refused to let silence win. The wind returned, snow swirled across the decks again, and Murmansk, the frozen heart of the north, kept breathing. Engines echoed through fog as we left the harbor. The wind carried coal smoke and salt, a bitter scent that clung to every thought. Convoy PQ-8, they called it. 35 ships in line, crawling north through ice floes. Destroyers flanked us like wolves, their decks white with frost. Above, the sun was a pale coin, lost behind cloud. We spoke little. Speech froze in the air before it reached another ear. The only voice was the sea, groaning, cracking, whispering beneath the hull. Each hour, another sound joined the rhythm, a creak of ice against steel, a signal lamp flicker across the dark. The steady heartbeat of the engines below. I still remember the first attack. A sound, not a sight, like the tearing of fabric. Then the sky opened, and tracer fire stitched the snow-filled air. Messerschmitts diving from the south, their wings glittered like knives. Anti-aircraft guns thundered, shaking the ship's bones. Shells burst white against the gray horizon. Records show 7 ships lost that day. We only saw 2, one burning, one already gone. The sea took both in silence. Night came early in the Arctic. By 4, the world was black again. Only the northern lights moved, green ribbons twisting over the convoy. For a moment, it looked almost peaceful. Then the wireless crackled. Submarine contact, starboard. Depth charges followed. Dull, heavy, final. Every man on deck knew what waited below. We called them wolves of the deep. They called us ice ghosts. Neither side was wrong. When quiet returned, it wasn't comfort. It was absence. The sound of nothing where something should be. A British sailor beside me whispered, "If this sea had a soul, it's frozen too." He never spoke again after March. Supplies mattered more than ships. Each crate held a promise. Fuel for T-34s, spare parts for bombers, bread for a starving city. We guarded them like relics. The logbooks later said, average survival rate for Arctic convoys, 1 in 3. We didn't know that number then. Maybe it was better we didn't. Still, the line of ships held. When one fell out, another closed the gap. Like men in a trench, no one left space for the cold to enter. The storms became worse than the enemy. Waves taller than houses broke across the deck. Men vanished overboard without a cry. Sometimes we found only a glove, or a patch of light still swinging. Inside the cabins, frost grew on bulkheads like white coral. We scraped it away with bayonets just to breathe. Oil lamps flickered, maps curled from damp. Even the steel seemed to shiver. Yet, somewhere beneath the fear, there was a strange calm. A rhythm we trusted more than hope itself. Engines, waves, ice, and the faint Morse tap from the flagship. Steady on. That pulse became everything. Not courage, something simpler. A decision to keep moving, whatever the sea demanded. By late February, we sighted land, a jagged white. Line beyond the mist. Kola Bay. Home again, if that word still had meaning. The harbor lights flickered through the snow. Each one seemed a soul returned. And as we entered the bay, the same wind that had driven us out met us once more. Only now, it sounded almost gentle, like a breath drawn after holding it too long. Under fire, Murmansk, March 1942. The sky never cleared that month. Smoke and snow mixed until color itself disappeared. You could smell the city before you saw it. Burned oil, frozen rope, diesel, and ash. When Convoy PQ-8 returned, Murmansk was still standing, but changed. Blocks of ice hid craters where streets had been. Warehouses burned by day, froze by night, their steel frames white with hoarfrost by dawn. The Luftwaffe came in waves, sometimes 40, sometimes 100 bombers at once. They circled low, following the line of the river, their shadows sliding over the snow. Each raid began the same, sirens, a whistle, then the long, falling silence before impact. We didn't run anymore. We moved toward the sound, to drag hoses, to throw sand, to save whatever could still burn usefully. The docks looked like a skeleton of the earth. Cranes twisted, rail cars split open, barrels of fuel leaking black veins across the ice. And yet, by morning, the cranes turned again. I saw a woman standing beside one. She wore a coat 2 sizes too large, hair stiff with frost, a red armband at her wrist. When the bombers left, she climbed back into the cab and started the engine herself. No one told her to stop. Records indicate that by spring, more than half the port's machinery had been destroyed. Still, output rose. Somehow, with hand tools and rope, they unloaded over 1 million tons of cargo in 1942 alone. I remember one night in March, the power gone, the air too cold for flame. We lit the docks with torches made from soaked rags. The light flickered over crates marked Bristol Aviation Fuel, each one worth more than gold and just as dangerous to touch. We worked until dawn. When the first light came, snow settled on the burnt ground like mercy. Someone found a piano upright in the ruins of a warehouse. Its keys were half gone, its sound thin as breath. But a worker struck a chord anyway. It didn't play music. It played defiance. They said the Germans called Murmansk the grave of the North. Maybe it was true. Every night we buried something, steel, hope, or memory. But the city itself refused burial. When food ran out, dock workers shared what arrived on ships: tinned meat from America, biscuits from Canada, coffee that tasted like metal but felt like warmth. No one spoke of fear. We measured courage in silence, in hands that didn't stop moving even as bombs fell. By April, the ice on the Kola Bay began to crack. That sound, sharp, clean, alive, was the first pure note we'd heard in months. It meant the sea would open again, and with it, new convoys, new risks, new reasons to endure. I often wonder now how many of us believed the war could still be won. Perhaps belief wasn't required, only movement. One crate, one ship, one harbor light at a time. That spring, Murmansk was still burning, but it also breathed. And in that breath, the Eastern Front found its heartbeat. Summer 1942. The thaw came suddenly. Snow turned to black rivers between the rails. Smoke rose from the docks like ghosts freed from ice. We'd survived the winter, but summer brought no peace, only clarity. Every crater, every twisted beam, every name on the wall stood sharp in the light. Trains waited beyond the port, their cars lined with tanks and crates of spare engines. The Lend-Lease shipments, that was the phrase they used. We called them lifelines, steel arteries that kept an entire front alive. Each day the numbers grew, hundreds of locomotives, thousands of trucks, aircraft packed in pieces, fuel and drums stacked higher than men could see. Records claim more than 4 million tons passed through this port before the war's end. But to us, it was simpler. One crate, one life, one chance. I remember the sound of cranes again, not new ones, rebuilt from scrap, their cables patched with ship wire and prayer. They groaned but never stopped. Sometimes, when the wind was still, you could hear their rhythm echo off the hills, a heartbeat made of iron. British sailors watched from their ships, faces burned by wind and reflection. Soviet dock workers answered with nods, not words. We didn't share language, only the weight of the same frost and fire. A British captain once left a note on a crate: "To the men who work in hell, with respect." It was never delivered officially, but the workers found it anyway. Someone pinned it to a wall above the tea stove. It stayed there until war's end, yellowed, smoke-stained, but never forgotten. German bombers still came, though fewer now. Their targets shifted to the rail yards. We learned to read the sky by sound, the difference between wind and an approaching engine. Each time the sirens wailed, we froze for a heartbeat, then kept moving. It wasn't courage anymore. It was rhythm, the rhythm of staying alive. Once, during a raid, a crate marked Hawker Hurricane parts split open. A propeller rolled into the snow, gleaming under sunlight. It looked almost beautiful, a piece of flight lying broken on the ground. A young worker knelt beside it, tracing his glove over the metal curve, as if to memorize what hope looked like. When trains finally departed east, their whistles echoed down the valley like hymns. Each sound meant another chance for Stalingrad, for Leningrad, for every name carved in frost. We stood watching until the last car vanished in haze. Someone whispered, "They'll call this the road of life." We didn't answer. We only listened, as the rails hummed under our boots. By July, the light never fully faded. Midnight looked like evening. Dawn came before sleep. We worked through both, our shadows long and thin against the yard. Sometimes I think that light kept us alive. Not warmth, just the fact of it. The sense that darkness had retreated, even slightly. But the truth is simpler. We didn't survive because we were strong. We survived because everything around us refused to stop moving. Engines, cranes, hearts. That was the rhythm of Murmansk, the rhythm of the North that wouldn't die. The sea never forgave arrogance. And that summer, we learned how quickly hope could drown. Convoy PQ-17 left Iceland on the 27th of June. 35 merchant ships, thousands of men, tens of thousands of tons of supplies meant for us. We waited at Murmansk, counting the days by the sound of distant surf. Rumors arrived first. Enemy sightings, a German battleship loose in the Arctic. The Tirpitz. Even the word made the air colder. Then came silence. No messages, No lights on the horizon, only wind against the radar masts. I still remember the night we heard the truth. The convoy had been ordered to scatter, protect themselves, they said. But scattered ships in the Arctic were like sparks in a storm, brief, bright, then gone. For a week the sea burned, oil fires drifting among ice floes, fragments of lifeboats, the smell of diesel and salt. Records show 24 ships lost, 2/3 of a Lifeline erased in 7 days. Some were torpedoed, some bombed, some simply vanished into fog too thick for memory. When survivors finally arrived, their faces looked older than their years, eyes ringed with frost, hands trembling even in July. One British sailor said nothing for hours. Then he whispered, "We froze them alive and the sea took the rest." No one asked what he meant. We already knew. The docks fell silent that week. Even the cranes seemed to pause between movements. For the first time, Murmansk felt like it was listening to the sea itself, demanding an answer. Strategists later called it a failure of command, a breakdown of coordination. But among us, it felt like betrayal by distance. Decisions made in warm rooms, paid for in ice and blood. Still, ships kept coming, PQ-18, PQ-19, each smaller, each more cautious. And each one somehow reached us. Not all, but enough. Enough to remind us that duty isn't belief, it's repetition. One night, after the losses of PQ-17, I walked the pier alone. The bay was still, the wrecks half buried under fog. A single buoy bell rang with each slow wave. It sounded like breath, thin, stubborn, alive. Someone had painted words on the quay in chalk. They did not sink alone. By morning, snow had washed the letters away. But I still see them sometimes, when the wind rises from the north. The war didn't pause for grief. Convoys gathered again, destroyers fueled, cargo loaded, as if the sea had no memory. But we remembered. Every light on the horizon after that felt like both a prayer and a warning, and each time one vanished into mist, we waited, listening for engines that would never return. Murmansk endured. The Lifeline bled, but it never broke. Darkness came back without ceremony. One morning, the sun simply failed to rise. The harbor froze in place, ships locked mid-turn, smoke drifting sideways, a whole city caught between breath and silence. We learned to live by sound again, the crack of frost beneath boots, the hum of engines running only to stay warm, the distant cough of artillery over the tundra. In winter, the air itself became a weapon. Metal snapped, oil thickened, ropes turned to stone. Men wrapped rags around their faces so the cold wouldn't flay their skin. Even speech hurt. Words froze in the mouth before reaching the air. But the convoys still came. Through storms that erased the horizon, through nights when compasses failed. They arrived like ghosts, their hulls sheathed in ice, their crews hollow-eyed but alive. Each arrival felt like defiance, a whisper against a world of noise. I remember standing on the pier one night, snow swirling like ash. A new ship eased through the channel, its searchlight cutting pale arcs across the fog. Someone beside me murmured, "Another one made it." We didn't cheer, we just nodded. Too tired for celebration, too grateful for words. Records say winter temperatures fell below -50. Yet Murmansk remained the only northern port still open. No icebreakers enough, no fuel enough, and still the cranes turned. We fed the front with steel and breath. Sometimes the Germans bombed by night, their flares turning snowfields to daylight. Every shadow looked like fire, but after each raid, people emerged from the smoke, sweeping glass, clearing rails, mending what could be mended. A woman near the rail yard lost her son that week. She came back the next morning, carrying a shovel. When someone asked why, she said, "The ships don't wait for grief." Then she went to work. As inside the warehouses, steam from our breath hung like fog. We painted crates with grease so the labels wouldn't freeze. Tanks, planes, flour, medicine, each box a small rebellion against despair. The sound of hammer on metal was the only rhythm left to trust. Clang, pause, clang. Between each strike, you could almost hear the sea breathing. Sometimes, during the rare hours of rest, we'd step outside and look north. Auroras spilled across the sky like torn banners, green, violet, gold, colors too beautiful for war. We stood in silence, watching the sky mend itself, as if to remind us that light could still return. By year's end, the trains east never stopped. Engines shuddered, whistles cried, and the Lifeline pulsed through the dark. It felt eternal then, a promise made of smoke and frost. And yet, even promises need breath. Hours came harder each day. The port still lived, but we could feel time thinning, like ice beneath boots, ready to crack without warning. Still, none of us spoke of ending. We had learned that survival is not hope, it is rhythm, and rhythm must be kept, no matter how quiet the world becomes. The wind changed first. After months of silence, it carried the smell of thaw, iron, mud, and the faint sweetness of rot. Snow retreated from the rails, rivers cracked open with a sound like thunder beneath our feet. For the first time in 2 years, Murmansk breathed without smoke. Not peace, but something close enough to remember its shape. The raids came less often now. The Luftwaffe's reach had shortened, their fuel spent, their attention drawn south. But we didn't trust quiet anymore. Silence, we had learned, was only a pause between storms. Convoy WWII arrived in May. From Britain, new trucks, aircraft, ammunition, and crates stamped food relief, Moscow. The men looked younger than before, faces still soft from the warmth of places that had never frozen. They stepped onto our docks, wide-eyed at what they saw. One of them asked if we were afraid here. No one answered. We just kept working. Fear had long ago become part of the air, like frost. Invisible, but always there. Still, that convoy brought something more than cargo. It brought sound, laughter echoing in the yards again. A radio playing Glenn Miller through static. A child chasing smoke between the cranes. Small things, but enough to remind us why men keep building even amid ruin. Records suggest that by mid-1943, over half the equipment at Stalingrad had arrived through Murmansk. Steel born in Detroit, shipped through Iceland, and unloaded by hands so cold they bled through gloves. Every tank that rolled east carried a fingerprint from this place. We didn't see battle, but the front passed through our palms each day. We felt its weight in every bolt, its cost in every absence at roll call. A British officer once said, "This harbor is a miracle stitched together by frostbite." He wasn't wrong, but miracles here didn't look like light. They looked like movement, the slow, relentless refusal to stop. By June, the snow had gone completely. The hills turned black again, streaked with oil and soot. Wildflowers grew between bomb craters, yellow against the gray. Children played there, throwing pebbles into puddles that reflected the cranes. No one told them not to. Maybe we needed the sound. That summer, we repaired what winter had claimed. New rails, new cranes, even a small chapel built from planks of wrecked ships. Its bell was forged from shrapnel, its tone uneven but honest. We could hear it across the harbor at shift change, a single clear note over engines and gulls. When I think of that spring now, I remember the feeling of hands that could move again, the ache of thaw, sharper than the cold ever was, the way light fell on metal as if blessing it. Some say that was when the war turned, not in battles, but in the rhythm of survival, in the proof that endurance could outlast fear. We still worked through night and storm, but something beneath the noise had changed. Hope, quiet, practical, wordless, had begun to thaw too. The sun stopped setting that year. For weeks the sky glowed like metal left to cool, and Murmansk worked beneath an endless day. The city no longer looked like a wound. Ruins stood beside new cranes, charred beams beside fresh timber. Smoke still rose, but now it smelled of coal and sawdust, not fire. Ships filled the harbor again. British, Canadian, Soviet, even American hulls lined in a single row. Flags fluttered weakly in the warm wind. Engines rumbled like a chorus of hearts. I walked the pier and realized something had changed. The faces were different. Older, yes, but steadier. The fear that once flickered behind every glance had dulled, replaced by a quiet knowing. The worst had already come, and we were still here. Records note that by 1944, the Arctic convoys carried victory itself. fuel for bombers over Berlin, tanks for the drive toward Warsaw, rail steel for the Red Army's push west. Each crate unloaded here meant a town rebuilt somewhere far away. Every light on the dock was a bridge between worlds still burning and those being reborn. We didn't speak of politics or borders, only weather and the sea and how long until the next ship. It was simpler that way. Survival had taught us language enough. Then one morning, word spread across the docks. The Germans were retreating from the north, their bases in Norway falling, their bombers no longer coming. For the first time since the war began, we looked up without bracing. The sky was just sky again. A few men laughed, some cried, most simply kept working, not out of duty, but habit, as if movement itself was proof of life. That day, a small steamer from Arkhangelsk arrived, her deck stacked with mail bags, letters from the front, from families we thought long lost. I opened one at random, a note from a soldier near Vitebsk. He wrote, "Tell the men of the north, the bread they sent tastes of iron and courage. No signature, no rank, just gratitude passed across a continent of ruin." At night, the light never left. We ate by it, worked by it, slept beneath it. It felt unnatural at first, a world too bright for memory. But slowly, we grew used to it. That long light carried no shadows, and maybe that was mercy. The cranes gleamed against the horizon, their cables humming in the breeze. Children walked along the quay again, their laughter cutting through the echo of engines. Somewhere beyond the bay, the sea shifted, calm now, no longer hungry. Even the gulls sounded different, their cries less sharp, almost forgiving. I think often of those we lost before that summer. The men swallowed by the sea, the workers buried beneath the docks, the nameless who kept the engines turning when hope froze. We never built statues for them. We built ships instead. And those ships carried their memory farther than stone ever could. As the light lingered over Murmansk, we finally understood what we had been fighting for. Not victory, not glory. Simply the right to see another dawn. The ice broke early that year. Cracks spread through the bay like veins, and the sound carried across the hills. A slow, resonant reminder that nothing stays frozen forever. We were older by then, faces lined, hands scarred, eyes dulled by too many winters. But when word came that the final convoy was approaching, men straightened, as if time had stepped backward. Convoy J67, 26 ships, the last of the Arctic line. They left the Clyde in March and came north through storms one final time. We waited at the pier in silence, listening for that familiar tremor in the water, the heartbeat of engines under ice. Then, one morning, they appeared, dark shapes on the horizon, slowly rising through mist. Destroyers first, then tankers, then merchant hulls lined with the scars of years at sea. No music, no flags, no parade, just horns. One long call that rolled across the bay like the memory of every ship that never returned. They brought no miracles this time, only the last necessities: fuel, food, medicine, and the letters of men who would soon go home. But their arrival meant something deeper, the promise kept. 4 years of frozen endurance completed its circle. Records state that the Arctic convoys delivered over 4 million tons of supplies to the Soviet front. More than 7,000 sailors lost. A third of the ships never returned. Each number is a wound measured in steel, each name a current beneath the calm. We knew none of that then. We only knew the sound of the anchors dropping, chains rattling against frost, the long exhale of engines going silent. The war was ending elsewhere, Berlin collapsing, flags changing hands faster than the wind. But here, at the edge of the world, the ending felt quieter, no celebration, just relief disguised as exhaustion. I remember a British officer shaking hands with a Soviet foreman. No translator, no ceremony. They simply held on a moment longer than custom required. Then both turned away, each toward his own shore. That was how peace began. Not with cheers, but with silence that didn't need to be broken. Night returned at last. After years of unbroken light, the sky dimmed to its proper shade of blue-black. Stars reappeared over the bay, tiny, distant, steady. We stood by the water, watching the reflection of the ships fade into stillness. The cranes, the rails, the ruins, everything seemed to breathe out at once. A dock worker beside me muttered, "It's over." Then, after a pause, "No, not over, just quieter." He was right. The war had ended, but the sound of it would live inside us always. The wind, the engines, the rhythm that kept the world from stopping. When dawn came, the harbor was empty again. Only gulls circling above the quiet sea. The same sea that had taken so much, now as calm as glass. I realized then what Murmansk truly was. Not a port, but a pulse. The frozen heart of a war that refused to die until it had given everything it could. And when it finally rested, the world could begin to breathe again. The war ended like a breath exhaled too long. No sirens, no speeches, just the slow return of ordinary sounds. Waves lapping against the quay, hammers rebuilding roofs, bootsteps without urgency. Murmansk looked different under peace. Not softer, just emptied of strain. Smoke still rose, but now from chimneys instead of bomb craters. The same cranes lifted timber instead of tanks. The same rails carried wheat instead of war. And yet, beneath it all, the rhythm never stopped. We still listened for engines on the horizon, still flinched at thunder mistaken for bombs. The body forgot nothing, neither did the sea. In the years that followed, they painted the ships new colors, built memorials, and filled museums with rusted fragments, propellers, helmets, compasses frozen in glass. But what I remember most are the sounds, the hum of a diesel warming at dawn, the whine of cranes swinging through fog, the whistle of a departing train carrying something needed elsewhere. Those sounds meant life continuing, the victory no monument could show. Records say Murmansk handled more cargo after the war than any other Arctic port. Its rail lines fed the rebuilding of cities that had once been names whispered through static. Leningrad, Kiev, Minsk, each regained breath because the North never stopped breathing. Sometimes, when the wind shifts from the bay, you can still smell the old harbor, iron, oil, and salt. It brings back faces I thought I had forgotten. A woman climbing into a shattered crane, a sailor whispering through cracked lips, "If this sea had a soul, it's frozen too." A boy chasing light between bomb shadows, all of them gone now, but somehow still here, woven into the air, into the hum that never left. Years later, an American visitor asked me what kept us alive. He wanted an answer about courage or faith. I told him the truth was simpler. "Movement," I said. "The heart stops when the hands stop." He nodded, but I don't think he understood. Few who didn't hear the wind here ever will. Every war leaves behind a silence, and Murmansk's was colder than most. But in that silence, there was also grace. A kind of stillness earned, not given. The cranes rusted, the docks aged. Yet when snow falls over the bay, it covers everything evenly. The living, the lost, the forgotten. And in that whiteness, you can almost believe the world forgave itself. Sometimes I walk to the edge of the water at night. The lights of the new city shimmer across the bay. Children laugh somewhere behind me, a sound we once thought the sea had stolen forever. The wind rises again, familiar and unbroken. It carries the faint echo of engines, a rhythm older than memory, steadier than peace. That's when I realize Murmansk never ended. It only learned to rest between storms. For those who came home, freedom was not a word. It was the sound of the sea still breathing.